Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. This is Eisenats again, and today I want to talk to you about proxies and budget brews. Although I just released a video about French commanders last week, I want to emphasize that I'm a huge advocate for protecting the integrity of cEDH. Pod-imbalance is extremely important to me, and while some people might call that gatekeeping, I don't. For me, it's not about keeping people away from cEDH, but preserving the integrity of what the format is actually about. I have to admit, however, that there actually is a lot of gatekeeping in our community, especially on platforms that grant more anonymity. I recently noticed that a lot of people think and argue in black and white. Commanders are either competitively viable or they're jank. Lists are either full-powered or jank, etc., etc. You get the idea. Unfortunately, those people completely ignore the fact that there is nuance to everything, especially power level. What's important though is integrity, being honest to yourself and the people you engage with. On one hand, you shouldn't step into a scene and enforce your own agenda by playing an ultra-budget brew or a objectively non-viable commander, but on the other hand, we should be more inclusive and open. In that spirit, I decided to make this video about budget restrictions in cEDH. Opposed to what a lot of cEDH players think, there actually are people who don't proxy and are therefore restricted by budget. This might be because their LGS or playgroup doesn't allow proxies, or simply because they only want to play with the cards they actually own. It's the reality for a lot of people, and we have to accept that, especially for newer players who just stepped into our scene. And I feel like we should talk about this more constructively. However, I am by no means an expert on budget brews, and therefore I decided to invite a special guest for this video. Please welcome TimmyT1000. Timmy, could you please introduce yourself?
How's it going?
Hey, could you please introduce yourself? Who are you and what do you do in the cEDH community?
Sure. So my name is TimmyT1000 around the internet. I run a little website, YouTube channel, Twitch channel, and Discord called cEDH Budget Brews. I have also been involved in several other projects, but this is kind of my main one. It's really an initiative to help kind of broaden the approachability of cEDH for non-cEDH players, particularly players who are kind of transitioning from casual commander to competitive commander.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, that's actually how I got to know you. I saw that you have a very active Moxfield page with a lot of decks, and I also know your website and your Discord is pretty active. So my first question for you is actually, why do you choose to commit so much time and energy into budget brews instead of proxying for full-powered cEDH?
So actually, the budget brews isn't really for me. I own basically every card you could need. Like, I can build pretty much any database list in paper without proxies, and pretty much outside of like one or two cards, which I do proxy if I need duplicates, I own them. And I quickly realized that not everybody is that fortunate, and that not everybody is fortunate enough to play in a meta like we do, you and I, like online with like the Nexus, cEDH, Founders Club, where proxying is not only encouraged, not only like allowed, but highly encouraged. In fact, two very recent examples for the reason of this initiative is Tier 1 Con and the Monarch tournaments. Both of those tournaments have a preset list of cards you can proxy, and you're allowed to have, I believe, up to 10? Question mark. And
I'm not sure myself. Gotta be honest.
It was like somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 or 10. So, like, let's say you play Blue Farm, for example.
Yeah.
Okay. There's more than 10 cards over $100 that are either A, on the reserve list, or B, over $100.
Yeah, you got the dual lands, you got the tutors, the rocks, everything.
Yep, exactly. Imp Seal, the mana rocks that are on the RL, like, there's a pretty considerable amount.
Yeah.
And so even if you built like say a blue farm build without any reserve list cards, that's still $2,400.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually
Right.
had a look at a lot of decks on the database when I made my last video, and you won't
Hmm.
pretty much get a full-powered cEDH deck under 1,500 euros.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a couple of examples that I have. Um, but mostly like, so if you're in any type of environment where you can't proxy, like you need these types of resources.
Mm.
Uh, as well as there's a lot of casual groups that kind of are transitioning into cEDH, or just like they're powering up in general. Um, Often, unfortunately, have this behavior pattern of gatekeeping their power level by not allowing proxies,
Yeah, especially in the
because powerful
casual
cards
community,
generally
right?
tend to
Yeah.
be. It's not universal, but particularly in groups where there's arms races, they
Mm-hmm.
they will not allow proxies because they want to keep the power level lower.
Yeah. Or maybe because
As much as
they
that
want to have the better deck compared to their friends, and just because they have
that
more
that
resources.
is that is a way that people have metagamed. I have run across that
Mm.
situation
Mm.
before, but most of the time it's just to try to keep like the power level down
Yeah.
somewhat. But it usually is kind of a losing battle, because essentially what winds up happening is the people that have more purchasing power build grossly more powerful decks than the people that have less purchasing power.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So your Discord, your website, your Twitch streams is basically meant as a way for casual players to like as a stepping stone to full powered cEDH. Would you say that?
in some level, yeah. That is one of the reasons for it. The
Mm.
other reason is there's a lot of CH players that run into situations where they have to build paper decks,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
and
like if you play a tournament in
like
a
I
LGS
don't
that
are you
doesn't allow proxies, for example.
right, and just having some amount of resources, some amount of reference on like different budget tiers,
Mm.
kind of maybe show people what to start out with and kind of work their way up towards. Like that's kind of it. The other thing, and this is where it's specifically targeted for non-CDH players transitioning, is that a lot of the budget CDH decks are really just simplified versions of the CDH decks.
Yeah.
And they're also like, people might own a significant portion of the cards already. Like if they've played standard for the last 2-3 years,
Mm.
they might own some shocklands, they might own some of the parts.
Yeah.
So it just makes it a little bit more approachable.
Mm-hmm. So does it mean that you don't even play budget cEDH yourself, and the website is just like a database for other people to send in their decks, or do you engage in budget brews as well?
I do. Particularly of late, I've been playing more budget CH decks, mostly just to kind of feel them out and really get a try for them.
Mm.
And there are some notable difference, at least with the meta that I play in. There's just a lot less blue and a lot less islands.
Mm.
Um, because even if people are playing blue, they're not playing shock. They're not playing dual fetch mana bases.
Yeah.
So you'll see a lot more like morphic pools and rejuvenating springs, and
Mm.
just not. So I tend to like a lot of my decks that have green in them. I tend to be cutting carpet of flowers, for example, a lot of
Yeah,
times.
makes sense. So
Yeah.
you obviously know a lot of budget decks because you run the website. For us
Hmm.
non-budget players, what restrictions does brewing on a budget come with? So how do you decide what cards to add, what cards to replace? And is there a priority, for example, for rocks or tutors or combo pieces? What advice do you have for brewing on a budget?
So if you're building a budget deck from scratch, generally my rule of thumb is that if your deck is proactive, i.e., it's trying to go burr as much as possible, I tend to prioritize my fast mana and tutors
Mm-hmm.
over my interaction and my predominantly my interaction.
Yeah.
Whereas if I am on a reactive or disruptive list, or a disruptive list, or maybe even adaptive, I will generally tend to prioritize my answers.
Which,
So, like,
yeah.
for example, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Makes sense, of course. Like if you're proactive, you need the rocks, you need the tutors. If you're disruptive or controlish, you need more control spells, the better control spells like Mana Drain and Force
Yep.
Will, etc.
Right. So, like, for example, a Swan Song is like $15, right?
Yeah.
Well, in my budget Cody build, my $500 version, I don't run Swan Song because that's the same price as a Grim Tutor. I prioritize my tutors and my my fast mana over my interaction, whereas my budget, my $500 Kiss build, will run stuff like Swan Song because it wants the interaction more so, but I'll also run less powerful rocks because I'm not as into the Nas plan is. I'm more of like a clear the board, counter everything, and then just lean on console.
Yeah, which actually leads us to the next question. So, you say you don't play the most efficient rocks in that build. So, how does budget cEDH compare to full powered cEDH gameplay wise? So, if you play in a budget pot, how does that differ from a full powered pot?
So, for one, oftentimes they're not purely like budget CH pods. It's usually like a couple of budget CH decks, and then like people's like high power or like really tuned mid power decks as well. Like budget CH is kind of a little bit of a misnomer, honestly. Unfortunately, I just didn't have a better way to describe it at the time. The pacing is a little bit slower. You sometimes will find that there's a lot less blue is noticeable for me. There's a lot less islands, and then there's not a like there is a higher opportunity if you can leverage it to kind of slip under the radar the first couple of turns with stuff. Just because you don't have the like force of wills and stuff.
Sure, makes sense that it's not as fast as full power cEDH because like not the best mana rocks, maybe not the free interaction you usually have in full power cEDH. So you have it's not like a turn 2, turn 3 game where you have to have an impact on turn 2, turn 3. Slower paced games.
You kind of want to be able to interact early, but you don't necessarily. But it's not as like you're not going to as consistently get win attempts on turn 3.
Yeah,
I guess.
So you just said that there isn't or most pods aren't like exclusively budget cEDH pods, and that leads me to my next question. So my biggest concern with budget brews or non-proxy environments is that they favor people with higher or bigger financial resources. And budget decks can be negatively impacted or can negatively impact the pot balance. So if you have like a full powered pot and then a $500 list that's maybe not as strong as it could be, how do you avoid the pay to win issue, and how do you avoid the issue of pot imbalance, especially with budget lists in full powered pots?
So one thing is I do not advocate playing a $500 budget CH deck against a budgetless CH deck at all. In fact, I discourage it. The metric that I have found, like again, this is just kind of through a limited testing of my personal experience, is that you really shouldn't play a deck in a pod where the average like price of the decks you're playing against is double. So like a $500 deck will play okay against like $250 decks all the way up to like a $750 deck. It'll be slightly favored or unfavored depending on like the composition. But like once you get over like $1,000, you probably shouldn't be playing a $500 deck against those because you'll start really running into those imbalance and power issues, and that's where Rule 0 is really important.
Okay, so you
like having an honest talk about it.
Yeah, so talk about it maybe optimally before the game, or maybe talk about it after the game if you like notice that there's an issue. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Definitely a good idea.
And players who want to play these decks in a budgetless meta, I do not encourage that. I usually either encourage them to wait until they're able to scale up to a higher budget. Because there are some decks that you can play that do kind of bend that rule some,
Mhm.
and I can talk about a couple examples.
Yeah, let's maybe
If you'd
keep
like.
those examples for my last questions.
We can do that.
Yeah. Okay, so you're not encouraging people to play budget lists or like extremely budget lists in full powered or non-budget metas just because it makes for imbalance and definitely um, you definitely have that pay to win issue.
It's just not
But
fun for anybody,
yeah,
honestly.
yeah, that's what I'm saying actually. Like like you engage with people who take time out of their day to engage in a hobby, and then
Right.
yeah, you're not like sticking
Yeah.
to the basic rules of the format. A lot of people call that
Right.
gatekeeping
Yeah.
actually, but I disagree.
I mean, it is gatekeeping, but like sometimes good fences build good neighbors,
Yeah,
and
that's good. I've never heard that
and
term yet.
they do, and sometimes you have to have rules in place to help you maintain the environment you're fostering,
Hmm.
and it's not everything is always going to be for everybody,
Hmm.
but you can definitely, but that gap is wider than we pretend is the problem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
There,
But I like the
there's
idea of,
somewhere in between.
well,
Go ahead.
I think like if you call it a fence, like you can always add a door to a fence. Like you open up the door, you invite people in. You like for example with our general understanding of how we use proxies, or that we are usually like most cEDH players, especially those who play online, are very proxy friendly and actually
Hmm.
encourage the use of proxies. So it's not like we're actually saying telling people to stay out, but more so like if you're going to come in, you're very welcome to come in, but please abide by the rules, if you want to call it that.
Right. Well, there's play spaces that literally part of the reason why they're structured the way they are is to very rigidly enforce the fact that players want to play against the best cards and people making the best plays,
Yeah, for example,
regardless
cEDH
of.
Nexus, right?
Uh, yep, that is an example of it.
Yeah, and
But
like
that's one of the reasons why they kind of do.
it's very noticeable if you play on the Nexus versus if you
Yeah.
play on like cEDH or Reddit. You really notice the difference in power level and in play patterns.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and the reason why that they kind of restrict new members is because it forces people who are hesitant to proxy to join that play group, because that's the expectation of that play group and that culture,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas there's other play spaces where they're just like, well, you can play whatever you want and it don't matter.
Mhm.
And that's that culture and that player experience, and both are equally valid and both are equally great.
Yeah, for those who don't know, if you want to play games on the cEDH Nexus Discord server, you have to use a deck list that's on the cEDH database. It has to basically be identical to one of those deck lists, and you have to play at least 5 or 10 games with it, and those will
It's
be
15 games, and you
15
can
games
play
now.
any deck on.
Yeah.
It was always been 15. It
Okay.
actually dropped from 20.
And then
And it's any deck on the database, and you can make like swaps based on like meta from the
yeah.
considering in the maybe board, and I
And
don't know, there's
that will
like
be
200
recorded, and
some
once you have
decks.
completed your 15 games with that, and you know like how people play on the Nexus and what they expect you to play, then you can build your own or use your own list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And brew as you wish and all that kind of stuff. But that's the thing, is they want to play against the best cards.
Yeah.
And there's another place that I play called sometimes it's called the virtual LGS, and they're like a completely open meta,
Mhm.
and they are perfectly fine with very obvious power level discrepancies, but that's what they want to do. Like,
Yeah.
the players that are playing in those games are fine with, I've got a slightly upgraded pre-cron against a Nekuzar deck that's very expensive. And they all have fun, but that's what
If
they're
that's fun
signing
for
up
you, if
for.
that's what you want to do, go ahead by all means.
Yeah, there's just no surprises there. That's the big thing, is just that everybody shows up and knows what to expect.
Yeah. Okay, Tim. So,
Yeah.
one more question. So, what do you think? Can full-powered cEDH players, or like proxy-friendly cEDH players, and budget brewers benefit from one another? Is there anything you feel is important to address concerning these two communities or approaches?
So absolutely. In fact, the way that I brew budget CH decks is I play them budgetless first.
Mm-hmm.
So if you'll notice, most of the lists that I maintain personally are decks that I play at least semi consistently. Like even if I
Mm-hmm.
don't play them all the time, like I have enough of a working knowledge, and then therefore I know what cards are important to keep and core combo and so
Yeah.
on and so forth. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Makes sense.
On the other side, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were about to say something.
It's like I have those three primers, the Urza primers and the Omnath primer, and I provide semi-budget lists for all of them, just to make it more
Mm-hmm.
approachable for people who just are
Yeah.
stepping into the scene. And I do the exact same thing. So I usually play the full powered lists, and then I think about like
Mm-hmm.
what cards can we replace with budget options, and how would that affect the gameplay. For example, with Urza, if you can't play the past mana rocks, you'll have to add cards like Saprosyn Scary or Crystal Vein just to turbo out Urza a bit, and then the deck becomes much more
Yep.
reliable on him, so you have to emphasize protection. So you have to have those cheap counter spells that are able to protect Urza from being removed. And then that's it.
Or even play Swiftfoot Boots.
Yeah. Maybe that protects
Right.
Urza. Taps for mana, perfect
Yeah.
card to add in a budget list, yeah.
Yeah. And so some of the stuff that you do learn as playing on budget versus playing not on budget is that you realize how much that you really like you realize what you can and can't get away with.
Yeah.
Like no matter what I try to tell you, not playing OG duels gives you a performance dip.
Of course,
Like
yeah.
and not just from the 2 life that you lose. It's mostly because you're limited on what fetch targets you have
Yeah.
significantly. Um
It's much.
Whereas, in in a proactive deck, having a force of will is not as important as being able to as having that mana fixing or having like Chrome Mox and Mana Vault and Mox Opal and Lotus Petal in your list.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I actually
So
what
you
I
kind of
notice when casual players come into cEDH and they try to build their first cEDH lists on a budget, you really see the difference in the approach. So people upgrading their casual
yeah.
list to a budget cEDH list have a way different list or outcome than when I use a full powered cEDH list and then tone it down to a budget list.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, it's totally different. Like for example, it's just a totally different meta. Like if I was to build, I actually have it's like a high power list that I kind of budgeted down to like 500. It's or no, it's a. Well, I have 2. I have a Catilda build, and then I also took Hipster Stacks, which is a cEDH deck, and I budgeted it down to like a 7 essentially. And I found that I was getting my ass handed to me all the time,
Mm.
and that's a good list. Like Hipster Stacks is good. So
That's a Naya list,
I
right?
had to tech in things. Yeah, it's the Naya, it's Arden and Tana,
Yeah,
and you
exactly.
play Godo as your win con, and Arden gets around all your null rods. But what
Mm.
I was finding was that I was dying to board wipes all the time. So I
Yeah.
had to start adding in like Selfless Spirit, Dauntless Escort. So like you'll see these like screwball cards in there, and you're like, why are you playing Dauntless Escort in
Yeah.
Hister Stacks? Well, because I need my stuff to be indestructible.
Yeah. Yeah, bot wipes
Like,
are much more common in other metas, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
they are, especially at the lower power metas.
yeah. So speaking of lists, actually, that's also my final question for today. What are your top 3 favorite budget brews? Um, tell us something about them. I'll add the links in the description box below for all the people who listen to this.
Okay. So I'm actually gonna have 3, and they're all gonna be different budget tiers.
Perfect.
So I'm gonna start with the $500 tier first. Um, that is going to be my budget Kess build. The reason why I like budget Kess is it's a really good like mid-range build. You got all access to all the cheap sweepers. You can play interaction, and you don't have to leverage fast mana as much.
Mm-hmm.
Fast mana is nice, but you don't have to have it because really, at the end of the day, the deck's best played with stopping everybody from doing stuff until you're able to like just consult Oracle. It's the best pure consult deck out there because you can recycle all your tutors, you recycle all your cantrips, all your board wipes.
Yeah,
and
you
just
try to win.
Grixis core.
You don't succeed, you just go for it again.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And then like your backup plan is Underworld Breach and Ad Nauseam. Now you can't Nause as deep as you can in like the more turbo builds, but you know I'd pay 5 mana to draw 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 cards.
Still good value. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that's nice with Kess is you can just Tainted Pact to end a turn, get your Oracle, untap, play Oracle, flashback your console, your Tainted Pact, and win.
Yeah.
And like
so compact.
So
so
means
efficient,
you just really just need it. Yeah, it's so compact. So and you don't need a lot of mana to do it. So that's what's nice is like you don't have to have like it's as long as you're willing to dedicate the early turns to stopping people, you'll find that you're not gonna fall behind as bad. So that's my like that's my favorite $500 list.
Okay.
So my favorite 750 list is actually Cody, the Turbo Nause build. So what's nice is that Turbo Nause is not that great at $500. It gets a lot better at 750. And what separates Cody from the other 750 Turbo Nause builds is that Cody fixes all your mana.
Yeah, true.
Actually, and actually that is not the $500 list, or that is a $500 list. Let me send you the 750. I'm sorry, but so Cody fixes all your mana. It's very ritual based. So when you have Cody, like you're it's very dedicated to tutoring. Like you play Cody, you pay your 1-drop, you get your profane tutor, you get your bring to light, you get your ad nos, and you just do the thing, right?
Yeah.
And since he leans so heavily into rituals, you can build a very powerful version of this deck for $750. The $500 version is good, but when you jump that extra $200, you really punch higher. It's also one of the few like budget decks that can punch higher than like that, you know, like that double budget per se, because it's so consistent, so fast.
Cody's just crazy. Like everybody who's ever played against it knows how incredibly fast and consistent the deck is.
Yeah. Well, it actually scales. Cody actually scales really well because I've played it at 100, I've played it at 5, I've played it at 750, I've played it at 1,000, and I've played budgetless and kind of and it generally tends to perform and punch higher than its budget tier. So like I would be pretty happy playing a 1K Cody list and like you know against like some of the like even like a budgetless Frog or Selvala, like decks like that. I would feel
maybe can't interact
like,
as well.
They were
yeah.
Like some of the lower color non-blue decks that don't interact as well. Like I would feel fine playing a 1,000 like a 1K Cody build against those.
Yeah, well, you're probably faster than
I would
them,
feel
so.
pretty confident. If I'm not as fast, I'm at least on par, and I'll maintain a relatively significant win rate.
Yeah.
And then lastly, the third one is a 1K list, and it is Godo. So this is actually it's actually gone up. It's actually a $1,200 list now. I will have to make some changes.
And it's also count to 11 win the game.
It is, but so here's the thing. So this Godo build is only 5 cards off of the database list.
It is? That's crazy. 5 cards that
cEDH
make such a
traders,
huge difference in cost. Yeah.
Lion's Eye Diamond,
Yeah, sure, of
Mox
course. Yeah.
Diamond, Gray Monolith, Wheel of Fortune.
Okay, so that's like $1,000 right there.
2,000 actually.
2,000.
So the budget list Godo build is about $3,000, and you take those 5 cards out, and this is what you get.
It's crazy how just like 5 cards double the price of the deck, triple the price of the deck actually.
Right. Yeah. And I would honestly, I would play this build in any meta, and I would feel pretty confident that nobody would even notice. Like if I didn't say anything and just played it, like it would do fine.
Nobody would be like, "Where's your Lion's Eye Diamond? Where's your Grim Monolith?"
Right. Yeah. Nobody would really question it. And I mean, obviously, I probably wouldn't like. I mean, if I was playing, I wouldn't try to sneak it in under the radar, obviously, because that's just disingenuous. But I would feel confident being able to play it in a
but also like if you are sure that you can hold your own in a full powered meta, why even make an issue out of it, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I also have like 300 games on Godo. Like, easily.
Yeah.
Like,
so you know what you're doing. Yeah.
But well, as much as any Godo pilot does, that isn't Hopi.
Mono red count to 11. Yeah.
Yeah. But so that this brings me to kind of my final point is that so there are some builds that will perform that are budget decks that will perform so nominally close to their budget list counterpart that there's almost like if you played 300 games on the deck and you played the budgeted version 300 and the budget list version 300, you would notice a difference.
Mm-hmm.
But just as like a bystander just picking the deck up and playing it, 10, 20 games, you probably wouldn't notice too much.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a performance decrease, but like decks like Godo, Selvala, Morrowind, even Kennen. Like, Kennen can do really good at like 500, 750, and 1,000 too. I wouldn't quite say like it'll quite perform as well as a non-blue deck. You definitely get more bang for your buck playing non-blue on a budget.
Yeah, sure, makes sense because like Time Twister, the free interaction, which is really expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So what you're saying is that some decks can be built more efficiently on a budget than others, and then some budget lists are actually so strong that you wouldn't even notice in a full powered pot.
Depending on what tier you're at. Like,
yeah, of course.
But they would probably,
not the 500.
But like a $500 Godo would definitely do pretty good against most decks. I wouldn't play it against against the Finns. It'd probably be too slow, but
Sure. Yeah, makes total sense. Yeah, Timmy, that's actually it. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer all these questions. I really appreciate you taking the time. You guys can find the deck list, the website, the Discord link, everything down below in the description box. Again, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure talking to you, and I hope this video helps to foster a healthier cEDH community and bring casual budget brewers and cEDH players closer together.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me.
So, what's the conclusion? Well, for me, it's nuance and respect. Should budget brews play in full-powered pots? Well, it depends. Are you only replacing absurdly expensive cards that aren't essential for your deck to function on a competitive level? Sure, let's play. Are you restricted to a minimal budget that doesn't allow your deck to compete on the highest level? Well, maybe play in a budget pot, my friend. Should people use proxies? Well, I personally think they should, but I can't force anyone to do so. We have to accept the fact that people get socialized in different gaming environments and have different opinions and priorities. Also, not everyone can proxy even if they wanted to. That's the reality, and we have to deal with that instead of being overly dogmatic and unnecessarily exclusive. In fact, I personally provide semi-budget lists for all of my cEDH decks, because I don't want to scare new players away. Those lists are, of course, still expensive and function on a high level, but they are much more affordable. In that sense, budget brews can be a stepping stone into full-powered cEDH, or simply the only way for some people to engage in this format. So let's just be more open about it. What do you guys think about this? Please leave a comment down below, like the video if you enjoyed it, share it with your friends, and of course, subscribe to the channel if you want more quality content in the future.